Have you ever wanted to go to some unknown land, not caring where? If you have, you may one day find yourself in the Borderland. Should this happen, there are a few things you need to know. The Borderland functions as a state between life and death. It follows a very specific set of rules not clearly explained in the show, and the version we see is not the only one. So, who gets to go to Borderland? What might the Borderland look like to you? What happens if all the players lose? And what does it mean to be a player, dealer, or citizen? Please be aware that there are spoilers ahead for the show and manga of Alice in Borderland, as well as the sequels Alice on Border Road and Alice in Borderland Retry. If that doesn't bother you, let's dive into how this world works, starting with the conditions for entry. There are two conditions for entering the Borderland. The first is that a person must be on the brink of death, and the second is that they must have been unsatisfied with their life. While the characters in the show were taken to the Borderland following a meteor strike, any event would be sufficient. The meteor strike itself was not the cause of the Borderland. Arisu actually returns to the Borderland again in Alice in Borderland Retry after being struck by a sign during a typhoon. In Alice on Border Road, a team of 5 people were put into medically induced cardiac arrest for 30 seconds to follow a terror suspect to the Borderland. Gaiman Kano, who was both a neuroscientist and the younger brother of Mira, arranged for this journey into the Borderland after having studied the meteor strike cohort and realizing that each of them suffered cardiac arrest and had been clinically dead while in the Borderland. The 30-second time limit was based on the amount of time before permanent damage could be done to the physical bodies of the participants. Gaiman estimated from the meteor strike participants that 30 seconds would correlate to 10 days to 2 weeks in Borderland. At the same time as Gaiman's experiment, 6 other people were involved in a shooting and traffic incident, which saw them suffer their own near-death experiences and enter the same version of the Borderland. It is stated that the human consciousness, which is in the state of clinical death, exists separately from the brain. And if several people were under the same conditions at the same time in a large-scale disaster or accident, then those people will be able to experience the same thing together when going into the Borderland. The Borderland is different depending on the circumstances of the arrivals. There were a large number of people affected by the Tokyo meteor strike and hundreds of people arriving in the Borderland at approximately the same time. With this number of people, the card games as seen in the show could occur. In Alice on Border Road, there are only 12 people in the Borderland. Their experience was different. They did not play the card games, but they were all assigned a face card on arrival. The challenge in Border Road was significantly different, with the participants having to figure out their objective and the main threat being the other participants' interpretation of what that goal was. Ultimately, to return to the real world, participants in this version of Borderland need only to travel back to the place they were when they were brought to the brink of death with their playing card. In Alice in Borderland Retry, Arisu returns to the Borderland with just 5 other people. Arisu and these other participants do play a death game, but it is only the one, and the survivors are then immediately returned to the real world. Of the 3 versions of the Borderland we've seen, only the card game from Alice in Borderland guarantees death to some of the participants. Border Road and Retry both involve situations where it is possible for all people entering the Borderland to survive. The Joker card at the end of Season 2 and at the end of the manga represents the being who controls the Borderland. In the manga, Arisu, when speaking with the Joker, sees him as an intermediary and envisions the Sanzu River, the Japanese version of the river Styx, with the Joker taking the role of a ferryman like Charon. It is the Joker who determines what version of the Borderland a group of people will see. If playing the card game as seen in the show, then upon arrival in the Borderland, a person is assigned one of 2 roles. They are either a player or a dealer. Both types of participants are only allowed to live in the Borderland for the duration of their visas. If they run out of days on their visa, they die, both in the Borderland and in the real world. Both categories of participants have ways to extend their visa. For players, they can participate in the death games. If they win, then their visa is extended by the number on the card. For example, the 3 of Clubs game extended Arisu's visa for 3 days. A dealer's visa is extended 1 day for each player who dies in the game they are hosting. If no one had survived the 3 of Clubs game, the dealer overseeing the game would have had their visa extended by 5 days, 1 day for each of the 5 players who died in their game. If a game is cleared by the players, the dealer overseeing the game has their visa immediately cancelled, and they are killed. So the dealer to the 3 of clubs game we see would have died as soon as Arisu and his friends won. The games themselves are designed by citizens, those people who have previously played the games and won, earning the right to remain in the Borderland permanently if they choose. It is implied in Alice on Border Road that, as the human consciousness separates from the body upon entry into the Borderland, that choosing to remain in the Borderland means allowing the physical body in the real world to eventually die. So for those who do choose to be a citizen, it really is permanent, as there is no body to return to in the real world. All of the characters in the show were victims of the meteor strike, with the first group of citizens being those who suffered cardiac arrest, minutes before the players and dealers we see. Within the card game, the first stage of the Borderland cycle is complete when either the players clear all 40 games or when all the players are dead. If the players clear the games, it is a player victory and all the dealers are killed. If the players all die, then it is a dealer victory. Either way, the surviving group of this first stage, whether dealers or players, then move on to the second stage. In many ways, the dealers do have the easier role. They are looked after by the citizens when in the dealer bases, being given supplies including meat and lobster, while the players are left to fend for themselves. The dealers often just oversee the games without participating, needing to do little more than watch the games on their screens, stage the scenes for the players, and clean up afterwards. The flip side of this is that most of the time, the dealers have little control over whether they live or die. If they are simply monitoring the games, they have no power to decide their outcomes. Some games do call for dealer participation, such as the tag game where horse mask wearing dealers are tasked with stopping the players from hitting the buttons to clear the game. Dealers can also be directed to die for a game. For the 10 of Hearts, the dealers were told they had to choose one of themselves to die. There is a rumor among the dealers that if one of them kills 100 players, that is, if 100 players die in the games they are supervising, then they will get to leave the Borderland. Similar to the rumor among the players that if one of them collects a copy of all the cards, then they alone will get to leave. Momoka volunteered to die in the 10 of Hearts game in the hope that either the players would lose, meaning Asahi as the other dealer would have over 100 deaths and may be able to leave the Borderland, or that the players would win, taking the time to figure out the answer and not devolve into killing one another as the citizens had planned. If a dealer discloses their status as a dealer, they will be eliminated. They are not allowed to speak, write, or communicate even in Morse code that they are a dealer. The second stage of the card game involves the surviving group, whether players or dealers, then facing off against the citizens of Borderland, those participants who have already survived the games themselves. If the citizens win, they remain in the Borderlands, waiting for the next group of people to be sent by the Joker. Conversely, if the player or dealer group wins, this means all the citizens have been killed, and the surviving group is offered a choice, whether to remain in the Borderland as a permanent resident, or whether to return to the real world. If they choose to return to the real world, then their memories of the Borderland will be locked away. It is possible to remember the Borderland after leaving, or to remember the circumstances of entering the Borderland when you arrive. To achieve either of these things, a key is required. A key is something that triggers a memory of either the real world or the Borderland. The team of 5 participants who were sent to the Borderland intentionally in Alice on Border Road were each given a replica of an item that was special to them but had been lost, something that they could not possibly have. People enter the Borderland with what they have on their person in the real world. Finding an item that cannot exist causes conflict in the participant's perception of reality and causes them to realize that they are not experiencing the real world, that the Borderland is not real. This also causes the participant to remember the circumstances of their entry into the Borderland. The trigger to remember Borderland or the circumstances for entry do not need to be physical though. In Alice in Borderland Retry, Arisu remembers his past experience of the Borderland shortly after re-entering, due to the familiarity of being in a deserted city and being forced to play a game. This may be the same experience had by the woman in the show who had brain surgery as a child, and was able to remember the real circumstances of the participant's entry into Borderland and the meteor strike. If she had already survived the Borderland once, returning could have triggered her memory. In Border Road, one of the participants is triggered after they shoot and kill another player in the Borderland. Shooting this player caused a conflict as they had already shot them in the real world. Killing them for seemingly the second time, something that should have been impossible, triggered their true memories. Mira's brother Gammon had also been able to help Meteor Strike Borderland players remember their experience in the Borderland through hypnotherapy. So it is possible that in time, Arisu and his friends may remember the Borderlands and each other. But that will do it for this video. Out of curiosity, please do let me know in the comments below whether you would choose to be a player or a dealer if given the choice.